Hi guys, this is Creative Cuts, a channel where I build, paint and create things. And on the topic of creativity, some ideas take a while to form. Maybe some research for inspiration needs to be done. Sometimes I start a project with a rough idea and let it evolve as I build. But sometimes an idea just pops into your head, fully formed and ready to go. Where moments like this come from, I'm not sure. Somewhere out there in the creative ether, the planets align and boom, a fully realised idea with a clear roadmap appears, almost like I have downloaded some info from some mysterious databank. Let me walk you through my idea. Now for a bit of context, I'm a pretty active person. I go to the gym and I've played most sports over the years in some form or fashion. However, I've never really been into golf. Maybe I would watch a bit on TV while having a lazy Sunday, but that was about it. And then one morning I woke up with an uncontrollable urge to hit a golf ball. Completely random, but I followed that urge and went to the local driving range and had lots of fun. Fast forward a couple of months and I bought a set of clubs and I now play once a week and really embrace the struggle to get better. But back to the model. I had a few calculations to make to get the scale right. And once I had the scale to work with, I could draw out my idea to get a visual sense of how all the elements could be combined. Now this may all seem like complete gibberish to you at this stage, but it made sense to me. And with a lot of building ahead of me, there was nothing left to do but jump right in and cut some wood. Now as a side quest for all of you watching, you can hit the like button for 10 bonus karma points, subscribe if you like these kind of build videos, and always feel free to ask questions in the comments below. And as if by magic, my table saw spat out all the parts I needed to build the base for this model. I opted for 6mm plywood, as this is nice and strong but still relatively light. I added little supports onto which I could sit my foam, and I glued everything together and made a hollow box. So far, so good. I then cut down some XPS foam to give me a very light but workable surface. I purposefully set the height of the supports so the foam protruded a couple of millimeters above the wooden base. Before I glued the foam in place, I painted all the inside of my box black. But why paint the inside black if you're not going to see it, I hear you ask? Because my idea was to have several viewing angles of different levels to really push a strong narrative theme encapsulated in a single static model, almost like multiple small scenes to tell a story. This was partly inspired by my last video, where I started to tell a small story where a sinkhole opens up in the street to reveal a hidden temple beneath. Link above if you want to watch that video. But I really liked this idea and wanted to see how far I could push it. But first I had to build the basic terrain for my golf hole. I used some offcuts of foam to raise the level and roughly mark out where I wanted my small stream to be. I used a sharp knife to shape these a little. This didn't need to be perfect at this stage, as I would get the nice undulations later with some sculptor mold. Once happy with the rough layout, I glued down the foam and then gave it all a quick once over with a blowtorch to soften the edges of the foam. I then mixed up some sculptor mold and spread this out all over my model. This is a fantastic product, and features in nearly all my builds at some point. But because I had mixed it up pretty wet, it was going to take a couple of days to fully dry. So in the meantime, I grabbed my Dremel and started to work on cutting out shapes from the base of my model. Now this is a bit of trial and error, and I eventually switched to using a multi-tool with a saw blade. I got my foam back out and started to fill in and shape out a rough cave shape. I built a quick doorway and added some walls. Now this was all a bit fiddly, but with a bit of patience, things started to really take shape. By using hot glue, I could work quickly and didn't have to wait ages for anything to dry. I cut out another small hole, which would be a tunnel using the same process as before, using sculptor mold to mold around the foam as before. Once everything was fully dry, I sanded the model to soften things further. I also took the opportunity to sand down the base of the model and clean things up after messing it all up with loads of sculptor mold. I then sealed all the plaster with a layer of Mod Podge. Now this is a key step that makes the plaster ready to paint, as it creates a waterproof layer and stops the paint being absorbed by the plaster. I then used some balsa wood strips to build some supports for my tunnel. Pretty simple, and I just dry fit and trimmed the supports down until they fit nicely. I also added some spikes in my main cavern. Now, this would be the basis for my idea, that some little goblins had come up with an overly elaborate scheme to collect golf balls, involving traps and secret entrances. I drilled a hole from above where I could add a secret trapdoor into a bunker. I used a combination of files and mini saw blades to shape this into a square. Next, I wanted to build a rope ladder that the goblins could use to slip between levels going unnoticed. I cut up some matchsticks and then glued one side onto a thin length of wire, keeping the spacing equal between the rungs of the ladder. I then glued another length of wire to complete the ladder. I threaded the ladder through my hole and glued the ends in place. I also built a small door out of some more matchsticks and some card. Next, it was time to press the reset button and get everything a uniform colour. So I loaded up my airbrush and sprayed the whole model black. Now in modelling, there are two main ways of adding grass. One is using static grass, fine fibres that you glue down using a static grass applicator. Another way to quickly add lots of grass with minimal mess and equipment is to use grass mats. This uses the same product as the static grass, but all the work has been done for you. All you need to do is cut to shape and glue it down. I had ordered a few different styles of mat to get a couple of different types of grass. Once I had glued these into place, I spread out a thin layer of PVA around the edges of my fairway and my green. I then used a combination of 2, 4 and 6mm grass to build up a natural looking meadow. And a quick note about different grass applicators. Save your money and avoid anything cheap, as they just generally don't work. Get yourself a decent one and it will make applying grass very easy. I build this up in several layers and lock each layer down with some thinned down PVA. I also disturb the grass a little with a coffee stick to create natural looking bunches and clumps of grass. And while the glue for the grass was drying, I painted in the base of my riverbed. Once dry, I used a bit more glue and sprinkled on some dried soil and a few pebbles here and there. And to lock all this down, I give it all a quick spritz of IPA to break the surface tension of a thin layer of PVA glue. Then I added a few fake plants to my riverbed to act as natural river weeds, along with a few tufts of grass in different lengths and colours to make some reeds. Next I laid down some glue for my path, which would lead down to a little bridge to cross the stream. I sprinkled on some forest texture, as this gave a lovely contrast between the path and the grass. The same as before, I locked all the small particles in with a thin layer of PVA. I then went about building a little bridge. I used some card and balsa wood strips to make a little handrail. With the grass looking good, I used the opportunity to add some sand to my bunkers. I tried to keep the glue for this very neat, which meant that I wasn't too worried about any extra sand landing on the grass. I could easily hoover this up later to create a really nice clean look. To continue the clean look of an immaculate golf lawn, I used a loose mark to spray in some clean edges to my fairway and green by spraying a darker green lightly to give a crisp transition. I also taped out some lines and gave these a really light dusting of paint to give that freshly mowed look to the grass. And next it was time to add some trees and foliage. Now usually I build my own trees, but I found some really nice looking trees whilst browsing for materials online and wanted to give them a go. They weren't cheap, but they provide a great solution for those pressed for time or for those who just don't want the faff of carefully building up your own trees. These are good to go straight out the packet. All you got to do is make a small hole and glue them down. I'd also ordered a few more modelling products like these small bushes, which are just really seafoam with some foliage cover glued on. They're all stuff you can buy separately and make yourself, but with these handy ready-made ones, you can just glue them on. I continued to add various bits of foliage and grass tufts from my stash of modelling materials left over from previous projects. And I tried to vary the size and colour to create a natural looking scene. And to add a few more subtle splashes of colour, I used a few mini flowers here and there. And now to my little gang of goblins that were up to lots of mischief. I spent lots of times in the evenings looking for suitable STL files with poses that could really work for my needs. I wanted figures with plenty of humour and fun, as they would really help to tell this story. I printed them off and primed them up, ready for painting. Now I painted these up in the evenings over the course of a week or so, and was really excited to add them to my model. I played around with different positions, creating little scenes within scenes. Small guys with leaf camouflage hiding in the bushes with slingshots, a few goofballs holding down the grass carpet ready for the spear trap below. One guy even hiding in a tree giving the thumbs up when the mission is ready to execute. But no golf hole would be complete without an actual hole for the golf ball to go in. So I drilled out a small hole in the green and used a kebab stick to make a flagstick. And with the green finally in place, I used the same loose masking technique to spray some green ink to sharpen up the edges of the green. I made a miniature plan to stick to the wall, just in case any goblins got confused to what the next steps were in their complex plan. And next I made a tee box by adding some tee markers and stuck down my golfer as if he had just hit the best shot of his life. I made up a bunch of golf balls by rolling up small balls of green stuff and painted these white. I had one goblin figure that was listening to a radio, so I decided that he would need a radio control system. So, using some small bits of foam and various bits and bobs, I made up a fun little control box. I cut up an old internet cable to get to the small wires inside and used these to wire up my radio. And everything was really coming together now, so I took the chance to clean up any edges of the model with some regular wall filler. I also began to cut out another hole in my base to create the scene which would be the entire reason for this complex ball collecting operation. I used my multi-tool as before to cut out a hole, and sanded down the edges with a sanding drum attachment on my Dremel. Same as before, I added some XPS foam to flesh out a cavernous room using the same process as previously. To this I added some sculptor mold and then sealed it all again with some Mod Podge. I had a few figures hauling large sacks or pushing mining carts, and I glued lots of golf balls onto these. I also wanted to get to pouring the resin for my river, so I used a couple of small strips of acrylic to dam off each end and fixed this all in place with some hot glue. I painted in my tunnel and then added my figure pushing his cart of golf balls. Now in isolation, this is not very detailed at all, but in the greater context of the model, this simple little mini-scene adds to the storytelling element of this diorama. I also printed out some skeletons and bone piles and added them around the spike trap to show that there have been many other unfortunate golfers trying their luck on this 13th hole. I painted up the final space and started to dress it with figures. I printed out a fat goblin king and thought it was a really fun idea that this whole massive golf ball collecting operation was all for the purpose of feeding the greedy Goblin King his favourite delicacy, a Ferrero Rocher style. I also painted on a gluttonous dribble of white drool from the King's overindulgence. Once the figures were in place, I also added a bit more dribble to the floor, plus the odd spilt golf ball that had got away. I added a final golf ball to the green, which was expertly struck by the golfer. And I needed to pour the resin for my stream, so I mixed up some epoxy resin and used some resin tints to colour the resin. Once I was happy with the colour, I poured it onto my riverbed. Once cured, I snapped off the acrylic dam, and unfortunately, little bits of paint chipped off where I'd glued the dam to the model. Not to worry, a little bit of filler and paint was all that was needed to fix this. I also added a sign for the 13th hole, and also spread out some gloss Mod Podge on the cured resin. And then used the air from my airbrush to move the mixture around a bit to create some natural looking ripples. And finally, I gave the whole model a fresh coat of black paint to clean everything up and to make things look nice and fresh. Wow. This has really been quite the ambitious build, but I'm really happy with the outcome. I want to thank you all for getting this far in the video, and for all the amazing support that you guys have continuously shown me on this journey. If you're new here and you like these kind of builds, you can subscribe to stay up to date with all the latest videos. Hit the like button to let YouTube know where the good stuff is. And I can't believe that we're getting closer and closer to 40,000 subscribers. Never in a million years would I have guessed that when I started all of this that I would be saying that, but I'm as motivated as ever to keep making videos and growing our fantastic community. Now I'll catch you all in the next one, but for now, gather round, get comfortable, and let me tell you a story about some trouble on the 13th hole. Enjoy.
boys, that's red team, go.
Yeah, I sees him.
I sees him too. Yeah, we got a good one. Okay, I'm in position.
Quick, here he comes.
I want more golf balls. Blah.